Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Osteoporosis Canada's webinar, Fractures, Fears, and Family. My name is Lorianne Manilak, and I am a fracture prevention education volunteer for Osteoporosis Canada, and I will be your moderator for today. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. In regards to IT issues, since COVID-19, there has been a lot more usage of virtual platforms such as this one, like Zoom, and systems have occasionally been overloaded and shut down or falter. Should we experience any issues, please bear with us while we attempt to fix this. For questions, you can enter your questions into the question box to the right of your screen, or if you're watching this on an iPhone, there may be a question icon at the bottom of your screen. We will answer as many as possible during this live webinar within the time available. However, please keep your questions relevant to the topics discussed. And remember, we cannot provide medical advice to specific individual questions. So again, on the disclaimer, this presentation will provide general information about bone health and osteoporosis. It is not intended as individualized health or medical advice. If you have any questions about your bone health and osteoporosis care and treatment, please consult with a healthcare professional. We would like to acknowledge that here in Regina, we are situated on Treaty 4 lands with a presence in Treaty 6. These are the territories of the Nahiawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Michif Nation. Today, these lands continue to be the shared territory of many diverse peoples from near and far. So before I introduce our guest speaker for today, I would like to tell you a little bit about Osteoporosis Canada and what we do. So Osteoporosis Canada, or OC, educates and empowers, supports individuals and communities in the risk reduction and treatment of osteoporosis and osteoporotic fractures. OC teaches Canadians how to improve their bone health so osteoporosis can never take hold. We support those already diagnosed and work to improve their quality of life. Our Scientific Advisory Council, or SAC, is made up of experts in osteoporosis and bone metabolism and is a volunteer membership. Comprised of clinicians, researchers, and educators, the SAC advises Osteoporosis Canada on scientific and medical issues and provides medical guidance to ensure our information is current and based on up-to-date research. Fracture prevention education is facilitated by trained volunteers from across the country who help inform, educate, and support those affected by osteoporosis. So our special guest speaker today is Christine Thomas. Christine is a previous member of Osteoporosis Canada's Board of Directors and is the author of Unbreakable, A Woman's Triumph Over Osteoporosis. Christine advocates strongly for better bone health for all Canadians, and through her own journey, has become a well-known expert in living with osteoporosis. Christine's story has inspired many and has been featured in media across Canada. So I'd like to give the floor over to Christine now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me, Lorianne? Good afternoon, everybody. I am thrilled to be here, and I want to thank Lorianne for that great introduction. Today, I'm going to talk to you about my journey of living with osteoporosis, and I'm going to talk about the challenges of living with the fractures caused by the disease, the fears and impact of living with osteoporosis, and some tools for you and your family to help manage and live well with the disease. Next slide, please. 20 years ago, I could look down the road and see nothing but sunshine. That was before I was struck by a disease I never saw coming, a disease that robbed me of everything I'd taken for granted. I was climbing the ladder of success. I'd completed my executive MBA, And my husband and I were anticipating the birth of our first child together with cautious optimism. I had had 3 previous miscarriages. I was determined to give birth to a healthy baby. And in September 2001, I gave birth to an 8.5-pound healthy baby girl. Unfortunately, my own story was darker. Because of a high-risk pregnancy, I was on bed rest and blood thinners. And I obviously went into the pregnancy with poor bone health and didn't know it. But the extent of the devastation revealed itself soon after arriving home from the hospital. I was bending over the crib to pick up my newborn baby, and I felt a jolt of pain in my spine, which nearly caused me to pass out. Luckily, my husband was there to catch me from falling, and I was in excruciating, debilitating pain. And I also had a minor fall in the home and again was in pain. And after a trip to emergency and a follow up with my physician, she called me at home and said, "Chris, I don't know how to tell you, but you have severe osteoporosis and 5 spinal fractures in your lower spine." So as you can imagine, I was absolutely devastated as a new mother. Next slide, please. So today I want to talk about 2 concepts and share some great visuals that really helped me better understand the disease. And what I'm hoping is when I walk through them that it will help you and your family better understand osteoporosis. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about what osteoporosis is first. Osteoporosis, or as we get older, we lose bone. But osteoporosis is abnormal bone loss. What happens is the bones become thinner, weaker, and break more easily. It doesn't just affect the quantity of your bone, it affects the quality of the bone, the microarchitecture. If you look at the visual on the left, you can see that bones are dense and strong, and the visual on the right shows an osteoporotic bone, where it's thinner, weaker, more web-like, and much more likely to break. Next slide, please. And one concept that I wanted to talk briefly about is something called peak bone mass. And this is when your bones are as dense and strong as they're ever going to be. It's at about age 16 to 20. That's when we're laying down the foundation for the bones for the rest of our life. And the things that affect your peak bone mass are your genetics, your physical activity, your nutrition, and some environmental factors. And if you think of your bone as a bone bank account, between the ages of about 0 to 20, you're putting in more deposits than withdrawals. Between the ages of about 20 to 30, deposits equal withdrawals in your bone bank account. After the age of 30, your withdrawals may exceed deposits. And particularly after menopause, because for women after menopause, menopause is mean to the bones. What happens is you lose estrogen, and estrogen protects the bone. So when you're young, you want to maximize your peak bone mass. As you get older, you want to slow the rate of that bone loss. You can have 2 women, for example. One, genetically, she may be destined to have a normal peak bone mass, but maybe she doesn't take care of herself. Poor nutrition, not enough calcium and vitamin D. Maybe she doesn't reach her peak bone mass, the optimal one. So she may be at risk for osteoporosis, particularly after menopause. Then you have somebody else, a young woman who takes good care of herself, good nutrition, good activity. However, her mother broke her hip because of osteoporosis. In other words, she's genetically predisposed to the disease, so she too may be at risk for osteoporosis, particularly after menopause. Next slide, please. So with the bone remodeling process, we tend to think of our bones more akin to rock as opposed to supple skin, where really bones are living tissue. And they're in the business of construction and demolition. And this is going on at a microscopic level in your body. You don't see it, you don't feel it, but it's happening. And healthy bone is always renewing itself. There are these cells that come in and they're called osteoclasts, and they dig little pits in the bone surface. and that old bone is removed and released into the bloodstream. After they finish their job, osteoblasts come in and fill in the pits in the bone surface. So what happens with osteoporosis is the bone is being broken down faster than it can be repaired. So it's almost like that visual in the center where you see where it's concave. So the bones become thinner, weaker, and can break more easily. Next slide, please. Now, I want to dispel a myth here. Many people know that osteoporosis affects women. They don't always realize that it affects men. But 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men over the age of 50 in Canada will break a bone because of osteoporosis. Next slide, please. So why do we talk about fractures or broken bones so much? Because once you have a fracture caused by osteoporosis, your risk of a future fracture goes up exponentially. And you may have heard the term fragility fracture. This is a fracture or a broken bone from low trauma. It can be, it's not from, let's say, falling off a roof or a ladder or car accidents. It's minimal trauma. It can be from sneezing, coughing, bending, twisting. In fact, it can be, for an example, you could be at home, you trip on a throw rug, let's say, and you go to brace yourself with your hands. Somebody with healthy bones may bruise badly. Somebody with osteoporosis can break one or more of their wrists. So the key is, if you have osteoporosis, you want to do everything possible to prevent that first broken bone. If you already have osteoporosis and a fracture, you want to do everything possible to prevent the cascade of future fractures. Next slide, please. So what I thought might be helpful for you and your family is to talk about the impact of spinal fractures in 3 different areas of my life: the physical, emotional, and financial. We often think and know about the physical, but a lot of people don't realize that there's an emotional impact as well as a financial impact of living with the disease. Next slide, please. Now, let's first take a look at the physical. Spinal fractures can be debilitating. The pain can be excruciating. However, for some people, there's very little pain or they don't feel it at all. In fact, about 2/3 of spinal fractures people don't even notice them. And what is happening there is there's tiny microfractures or cracks in the spine that happen very slowly and very gradually over time. So people don't notice it. But a family doctor may notice that you're losing height. And that can be one of the first signs that you have osteoporosis. So they should take a look at your bone health. But let's look at some of the possible consequences of spinal fractures. So one is loss of height. For example, I've had multiple compression fractures, so I've lost 3 inches in height. For some people, it's loss of flexibility, loss of mobility. If you can see in the skeleton on the far right, there's multiple compression fractures. What happens there is there's a curvature of the spine, which puts pressure on the internal organs, and they have nowhere to go but out. So there can be a protruding stomach, and it can lead to heartburn, indigestion, and difficulty breathing. And we share this because we show that osteoporosis, it's not just an aesthetic issue. It can be very serious because it can have an impact on other organs in the body. Next slide, please. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, what does a spinal fracture look like? And I love this visual because it's a great example of what it can look like. If you look at the vertebra on the top there, it's square, it's healthy. The one underneath it is concave, and it's got a fracture. And if you have, when you have a fracture, eventually it does heal. But what you need to know is the shape of that vertebra will not go back to its original shape in the shape of a square. So if you have multiple compression fractures, if you can visualize one on top of the other, where there's the front of the vertebrae is crushed, you can see how the spine would start to curve forward. And if that's in the upper spine, we call that kyphosis. And the thing to note with people with spinal fractures that's so important is you want to make sure that you do exercises to support the muscles around the spine to keep it tall and strong. Next slide, please. Now, I was pretty much a mess for a long time. It took me about a year to get a version of my life back. And just to give you an example, I had more than 50 appointments, health care appointments in an 18-month period with occupational therapy, physiotherapy, family doctor, endocrinologist, blood work, X-ray, bone mineral density tests. It was pretty demanding. And I share it because a lot of people think, oh, well, you know what, does osteoporosis really have an impact on your quality of life? And yes, it can have an impact on your quality of life. For me, my life came to a complete halt. I lost all my independence. My husband had to help me shower and dress. The pain was debilitating. I learned that chronic pain can rob you blind. It can take away your livelihood, your friends, for some people, their marriage, and big chunks of your personality. I'm a pretty fun person, but I'm not fun when I'm in pain. And for myself, we had to hire a full-time caregiver to take care of my newborn baby. And it was winter and cold and icy, and I felt I was spiraling into a depression. And I share that openly because it wasn't until two doctors approached me and suggested to take an antidepressant that I did so to help me get back in the game of life, because there are many people that are diagnosed with fractures caused by osteoporosis that suffer about a depression. And I always encourage them to talk to their family doctor about options to deal with that. So life demands choices. I chose to take an antidepressant and a pain medication to help to get back in the game of life. Next slide, please. So for some of you, it probably is pretty easy. You hop out of bed in the morning, hop in the shower, and get your day going. For somebody with spinal fractures, some of us use what's called the log roll, and it's a great technique. If you're lying on your bed, you gently pull your knees up, you turn to the side, and then you gently sit up in the bed. And it's a great way to get in and out of bed that takes less pressure off the spine. I exercise and stretch religiously. I have exercises guided by a physiotherapist. I also have a tune-up with my physiotherapist whenever I injure myself. It affects all my daily activities. You know, we should all be cognizant of body mechanics, but particularly people with spinal fractures, there should be no forward bending of the spine or forward bending and lifting or lifting and twisting. You have to be very careful not to put excess pressure on the spine. Also, my family and I, we love to travel, but we have to take into consideration my back and spine, whatever we do. Just to give you a simple example, when my daughter was in elementary school, I offered to go on a school bus trip with the kids. We got on the bus, I sat near the back, we were headed to a pancake breakfast. The school bus hit a pothole and the kids went flying. They all had fun and thought it was great. And it was excruciatingly painful for me. So it's some things that I have lessons learned and I have to take into consideration when I'm traveling. It's also affected a lot of our purchase decisions. It affects the vehicle that we buy. I have to have ergonomic, comfortable seating. It affects the mattresses that we purchase for our bed. It affects the furniture that we buy. It all has to be dense, comfortable foam. Buy butter soft leather couch, buy any type of sports car. It affects a lot of our purchase decisions. Next slide, please. So after about 8 months, my fractures started healing. The pain became more manageable. I graduated from a walker to a cane to my own 2 feet. And now at 61 years young, I feel that I manage the disease instead of letting it manage me. As I mentioned earlier, I manage my physical health by exercising religiously. I see a reputable physiotherapist. And if you see somebody really good, it doesn't just help you gain strength, it helps you gain the confidence to get back, your daily activities. I make sure I get enough calcium and vitamin D, and I'm also on an osteoporosis medication. I also manage my emotional health. When you're diagnosed with a chronic disease, emotional scars can run deep. So I feel that you have to address, you have to heal the mind, body, and soul. And I use tools and techniques to turn around my mood, such as meditation and progressive muscle relaxation. And also, I focus on what I can do instead of what I can't do. Next slide, please. This is the reason why I'm unbreakable. Osteoporosis broke my spine. It did not break my spirit. This is my daughter when she was much younger. She is now 19 years old and in university. Next slide, please. So, how do we build better bones? It's important to know your risk factors. There's a great risk quiz on the Osteoporosis Canada site, and I encourage you and your family members to take the risk quiz, get a bone mineral density test. Physical activity and exercise is really important. It improves your overall health, your bone health, your mood, and it gets those natural endorphins releasing as well, which is great. Eat the right stuff, make sure you get enough calcium and vitamin D, and report fractures and falls. As we get older, we tend to fall more. And it's really important, that you share that with your family doctor if you're experiencing falls, because falls can lead to broken bones. And the other key is to listen to your body. You know it better than anybody else. If somebody recommends a stretch or an exercise that doesn't feel right, then discard it and pick something else that does feel right for you. Next slide, please. Now, over the years, I've been able to develop an absolutely fantastic healthcare team, but I am the captain of the team. I want to be part and parcel of the decisions that affect my body. I do my homework before my appointments. I write down the top 3 burning questions that I have for my doctor because I know how busy they are. And what I encourage people to do when they go to appointments is to do that and prepare for their appointments. And it can be very overwhelming, and because your appointment can be short. And so I always encourage people to bring somebody with them to their healthcare appointment so they have another set of ears to listen or take notes or help share the information once they leave the appointment in case they forget anything. Once I began my journey to recovery and I started healing, I reached out to Osteoporosis Canada, and it's been a win-win ever since. I was able to gain so much information to help me learn to live well with the disease. Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to mention with this slide to be cautious of is Google and unsolicited advice. Osteoporosis Canada, as Lorianne mentioned at the beginning, we have a scientific advisory council that when we present something on the site, it is evidence-based. It is backed by science, it is backed by research, and that is really important. There's a lot of stuff on Google that is not backed by scientific evidence. Also, we'll get calls in that say, oh, my neighbor Susie told me that if I drink coconut water every day, it's going to cure my osteoporosis. Well, I don't know if that's backed by science. So I would, if somebody suggests something, just say thank you, maybe consult with your family doctor, go to a reputable site like Osteoporosis Canada and see whether it is in fact backed by science. But I just caution people about things like that. Next slide, please. Now, when you're diagnosed with osteoporosis, and particularly a fracture, it affects the entire family. So what I thought would be helpful is to share tips that my husband has shared with me, particularly in acute phase or right after a fracture. He said to focus on one day at a time, because each day will get a little bit better than the last. To be a good listener, particularly in those really dark days. To focus on progress, no matter how little the progress. I remember for me, one of my goals was to get around the block, one turn around the block with my walker. And, I would set little goals like that and try to celebrate some way on my progress. To keep encouraging your partner, to keep trying new tools. If one stretch or exercise doesn't work, try something else. If you have a physiotherapist that you're not connecting with, or you don't feel they're reputable, or you don't feel that they understand osteoporosis, try another physiotherapist. If you don't like meditation, maybe try breathing exercises, but never quit trying. Years ago, I was giving a seminar in Ottawa, and I met a woman in her 90s who approached me after the seminar, and she never stopped wanting to learn more about how to improve her bone health. And I'm happy to say that we became friends, and I went to her 100th birthday party, and she was such an amazing inspiration to me and so many others. Next slide, please. Now, I want to share two tools that I highly recommend. One is the Canadian Osteoporosis Patient Network. It's free. You register online on the site, and you will get a newsletter once a month chocked full of great information. It could be on calcium, vitamin D, exercises, pain management, patient stories. Because the thing to remember is you have about a 20-minute appointment with your doctor. After that, you have to learn to live well with the disease by yourself. So I highly recommend and encourage you to become a member of COPN. We have about 10,000 members from across Canada, and I treat it like after sales service, that you need after seeing your doctor. The other great tool is called Too Fit to Fracture, and it's great information and in videos on exercising. And it can be on posture, balance, aerobic activity, all kinds of great information, and particularly the videos. The visuals are great to guide you through. Next slide, please. Now, what I've learned in my journey of living with osteoporosis is that our healthcare system has fractures. Less than 20% of fracture patients are diagnosed and treated for their underlying osteoporosis. That's in sharp contrast to somebody who's had a heart attack. More than 80% are treated with beta blockers, or at least offered beta blockers. And I've lived this. I have a sister who had a couple of years ago had a heart attack. I went to see her in the hospital, and she was given guides, tools, resources. We sat through seminars on heart health nutrition. She had access to a gym, a library, medication. In other words, they armed her with every possible tool to prevent another heart attack. Contrast that with myself. I was in the hospital after my spinal fractures. I said to the orthopedic surgeon, what happens if I fracture again? He said, put on your back brace and carry on. No tools, no resources, no recommendation for physio, and no medication. It's not okay that we have men and women over the age of 50 in provinces across Canada arriving in emergency with a wrist fracture and coming back with another fracture within 10 years for repeat. It's repeat business because they're never diagnosed and treated for their underlying osteoporosis. And that's why Osteoporosis Canada exists today. They advocate for people to help broken bones. So what I'm determined to do now, besides pay attention to my own bone health, is get the word out there that osteoporosis is a big deal. It invades like a thief in the night because we often don't know it until we break a bone. But bones, even declining ones, can be kept healthy. The first step is awareness. Many people say, oh, I'll take care of my bones when I'm in my 90s. And I'm here to say waiting's not an option. It's never too late or too early to take care of your bones. So in closing, what I'd like to say is I'd like to share a quote by the anthropologist Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a group of dedicated individuals can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine, for such an informative, very personable presentation. And now I'd like to bring it over to our question and answer portion. And so if you could type out your questions into the box. We're not utilizing the chat, so please remember to use the Q&A box. The questions will be read out by our Community Education Coordinator, Sandy Owczar, who will read the questions to Christine. And we have approximately about 10-15 minutes for this question and answer segment. So I'll have Sandy could begin asking the questions over to Christine.
Okay, thank you very much, Lorianne, and thank you, Christine. Thank you so much for sharing your personal journey with us. It's really interesting, and we really appreciate that. And we're going to remember some of the things that you've said for a long time, and when we're looking at our own situation. So much appreciated. We have a lot of questions about the journey itself, and so maybe I'll try to sort of bring some variety to them. But one of them I found interesting and goes back to your husband. And he must have, the question reads that your husband must have experienced a lot of anxiety and stress as well. How did he cope? And were there supports for him and your daughter as you went through this journey?
That's a very good question. And yes, he did go through a tremendous amount of anxiety because he had just got a promotion. In the first 2 weeks after the fractures, we had friends and family helping out, thinking, oh, this will be over in a couple of weeks, not knowing that we were in for the long haul. And that's when we had to hire a full-time caregiver for my daughter. And I found that my daughter was bonding with her more than me. So it was difficult for all of us. And he was my tower of strength. And now I would direct somebody like him to the Canadian Osteoporosis Patient Network. But at the time, there really nothing existed for support for family members. It was all new to us, particularly because I was young. I was diagnosed at 42. So no, we navigated this tough territory ourselves. But, family and friends supported. But yes, it was a very difficult time for him too.
Yeah, can imagine. Wow. Another question, and it actually ties into, I think, to that care gap that you spoke about. But you do a lot of your own advocating. You were very strong to do that for yourself. But how does one sift through all this information out there?
Oh, that's another very good question. Now, what I go back to recommending, because yes, if you Google the word osteoporosis, it's unbelievable what comes up. And so you have to be very careful. And that's why I say I recommend to people to go to reputable sites, the Osteoporosis Canada site, the National Osteoporosis Foundation in the United States, or even, you can look at other country sites if you want. Also, they all have, Osteoporosis Canada has blogs. They also have a podcast. They have, what is helpful too, they have the guidelines, the actual national guidelines that go out to healthcare professionals on how to diagnose, management, and treat osteoporosis, because you want to look at science, evidence-based recommendations. Right. That's really, really, really important. Right.
Very important. Yes, there's a lot of stuff out there that we don't want to pay attention to. Let's see what else we've got here. Oh, this is another interesting one. Sometimes I don't look sick, and sometimes it's hard for people to understand when I can't go for the long walks or sit at the dinner table for a long time with them. How do you respond without bringing the mood of the evening or afternoon down and start getting into the health ailment type of conversation? Do you have little tricks that you use for that?
Oh, I'm so glad that somebody raised that, because it's interesting. I know somebody with rheumatoid arthritis who just put a post out on that on Twitter last night because of that exact same thing. And I find that that's a two-way street, that part of it I've had to learn to communicate, you're right, without bringing everybody else down. It's like you almost say, okay, let's say a group of people want to go on a 5-kilometer hike or something, and I just can't do it that day. I almost have to say, thank you, I would really like to join you, but I'm just not up to it today. And then close it off, because you're right, you don't want to bring everybody else down. But I've also learned that if I do not communicate and I'm just, it's a bad day for me, I can't make the assumption that people understand that I'm going through that. They don't know it, they can't see it, they can't feel it. So I have to communicate that and not just complain, but say, you know what, it's not a good day for me today, so I think I'm just going to
Yeah.
do something else. But or what I try to do as well is, okay, maybe I can join you for half of it, or I'll take my walking poles, or I'll do something to try to do something in between. But you're right, it's really difficult. Particularly, I had a young child, remember, that there were a lot of things I couldn't do with her. So I had to improvise and do other things that were fun with her and the family.
Yeah. A lot of
I
thought.
hope that answers your question. But I've learned it's not just about them communicating, it's about me communicating as well, because they can't read my body and they can't read my mind.
Right, right. Okay, thank you. And I think I'm looking at the time here, and I think we have time for one more question before we pass it back to Lorianne. And this kind of ties in as well. There are activities that I'm not sure if I should do or not. Who can I talk to make sure I know what I can and can't do?
Now, again, I'll go back to the Osteoporosis Canada site, because there is some information on that. But what I recommend to most people is my physiotherapist is my lifeline. She was my lifeline. She is still my lifeline, because she's reputable. She understands fractures caused by osteoporosis. She knows what people should and should not do with spinal fractures. She guides me not just on exercises and stretches, but also what I should and should not do. And there are physiotherapists out there that do understand osteoporosis. There are others that do not. So you have to be very careful, because I find the family doctors will guide you in other aspects of bone health, but they don't always have the time to get in the specifics in terms of exercise. The only other thing I wanted to mention that I thought of from a previous question, also, when things come up in the news, let's say there's a new study on vitamin D or calcium or whatever, and it comes out in the news, and everybody's in an uproar, and they oh, do I stop taking vitamin D? What Osteoporosis Canada has a rapid response team. So when they see something like that in the news that can affect bone health, they will get a team together, their rapid response team. They will assess what's been released in the news. They will look at the scientific evidence, and they will put out a statement, so it's good to also keep on touch of that, so that you don't just decide, oh, I'm going to stop taking my vitamin D now. Whoa, put on the brakes. Make sure that you see a scientific, evidence response out there before you make any, or talk to your family doctor.
Mm-hmm. good to know. There is a lot of stuff out there that you're not sure if you should listen to or not. So good to know. We've just got a minute or two left. I would like to say, though, that there are a lot of comments, Christine, about how inspiring and informative, and thanking you for your presentation. So again, I'm going to say thank you for sharing your information with us. And I'm going to pass it back to Lorianne, and she's going to finish off with a few more bits and pieces for us. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you so much, Sandy and Christine, for answering all the questions. So I'll share the screen again. Okay, so going back to, I'll bring back your attention to our website, osteoporosis.ca, where you'll find a few things that are very, very useful. First is the calcium calculator, which is used to calculate if you're getting enough calcium in your diet. So there are very common foods here that are listed, and the amount of how much of that food and how much calcium you can get from each of the foods listed. And I think it's very helpful for us because oftentimes we don't know how much calcium is in foods. And it surprised me that broccoli has a lot of calcium. And so that's a really great tool. There's also OC recipes. All sorts of calcium and bone nutrient ingredients are in these recipes that are listed in this part of the website. There's also the quiz of our Are You at Risk quiz. That's basically you're able to assess your knowledge of or your risk for osteoporosis. So that's really a great quiz to take, resource. And there's also Osteoporosis Canada replay, where you'll find out past webinars that are recorded and cooking classes. So that includes our webinar. We hope you enjoyed it and are taking away a little bit more information to help you in your journey with managing your bone health. I'd like to thank Christine again for her presentation, for Sandy, also for our special thanks to the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation at Harbour Landing Village for partnering with us. And thank you also for tuning in and all for your wonderful questions. Thank you, and please feel free to contact us if you need any more information. Have a great rest of your day, and have a great weekend.